Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Emotional Innovation Lab. Welcome back to the Emotional Innovation Lab. If you joined us before, welcome if you're new. I'm Penny, and I'm
And
here.
I'm Vincent, and I'm just looking forward for us to continue to meet. And we'll also leave a little clip for you to check in and see what we did prior to attending the next meeting.
So, what's new on your end?
So what's new on me, and I thought might be a good topic for us to think about as we look at the emotional innovation lab and what does that really mean? Is thinking of how can we support each other during these up and down times. So, for example, last night I reached out to my core, what I call my core friends, and I saw an inspirational message on social media, which sometimes they're good, sometimes they're crazy, but you take the good with the bad, right?
Right?
So, this one reflected on, I don't know if you know, yesterday was Blackout Friday.
Yeah, I
And
did
so,
that.
you did, okay, so it really was about us coming together and making a statement that we were not happy with the way things were going. When I say we, I mean some people. And please keep in mind, in the Emotional Innovation Lab, it is a safe space, and we respect all, and we come from different lenses. So I want to make sure that I stress that because I'm bringing it from one perspective, and that doesn't mean everybody supports that perspective. And that's why we have the Emotional Innovation Lab. So we have that space to just hear each other. So this is just one perspective I bring today. So I was willing to support the Blackout Friday, which is don't shop at Amazon, Walmart, and other major retailers that have not shown the support of being inclusive. And that is really my concern. So when I was talking to some of my colleagues, one of the things that came up is this would not make a difference in one day. Although they support it, they were like, one day is not going to make a change. And so we had a conversation about how and when I say conversation, this is through social media. So I don't know if that's a conversation or you post, I post,
A
wait, post.
chat, maybe.
Yeah, it is a chat, slow chat. But the basis of it was even back in several years ago in this country, that was how things started. That's the beginning of uh, acknowledgement, protest, people coming together to say change is needed. And so it wasn't so much about the impact of the day, but how it could be a start. So what I'm getting at is this person supports my same views, but it was just interesting how the person came back with so much of not respecting that that was the beginning. Another thing happened where a friend of mine's posted on social media, a person, uh, that they had to go shopping. Sorry, I have to go shopping. My question was, why do you have to put that out in social media? Things we do have to do things. I know that you support it. I know you believe in it, but it was interesting how we share. So, in summary, I'm just thinking more and more on how I work with individuals and how we navigate to understand that we can have differences, but we also have to understand how we support each other. And so that was one of my exercises this week was to say, I understand everyone's view. We all try to move in the same direction and we have different perspectives. And I think that's very important for us all to think about as we continue to be in this space of community to try to share our thoughts and how we want to make things right
Or better.
or better.
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's great, Vincent. I think that's all very important. What came up for me when you were talking about that, it was you said share our perspectives. And I think for me, when I look at this entire thing, it seems the divide is about, you know, not necessarily perspectives, but more so towards opinions, beliefs, and the division there, and the fact that we can't, many of us can no longer find a way to respect that other people can have a different thought process or a different belief system. And that really is the core of the whole division is there seems to be a group of people that is very intent on making their belief system the one that everyone has to fall under. So I think that's, there are reasons for that, and they believe strongly in their reasons. And I'm not trying to disparage anybody or go political, but I think that's really the core of the debate and the disagreement is just how to respect each other and be okay having differences.
I I remember, Penny, you and I had a conversation before about something. You just brought it up again, and and thank you for sharing that piece and how you listened and heard what I was saying and elaborate on it. The word perspective. You remember in a past discussion, you and I got in a discussion about the use of a word and how that word has different meanings from person's lived experiences or past experience.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you called out perspective, opinion, and belief. Because again, those are three words when we have talked about um, emotional, unpacking emotional baggage and what has happened in our prior life that weighs a lot. Because belief can be a religious belief, and we talked about that and how that can just so restrict your way of being.
Mhm.
Opinions, we talked about how some people take opinions for facts. And
Mhm.
so that was very interesting. So
Right.
one of the things I think we can work out in the innovation lab is really thinking about when we use words, how do we understand the word we're using is interpreted by the different people in the circle of the communication and conversation. And especially in social media where 10,000 are looking at it and it's going in so many different directions over one word when the clarity is really the intent of what you didn't say do right, you said better,
Better.
better. So maybe that's something just to really think about as we continue our discussions.
Yeah, I think, everything is through the lens of observation. And then observation will, our experiences bring in
Mm.
our different viewpoints, our perspectives, and our opinions. And something doesn't become judgmental until you add a personal opinion to your observation. So I think that's another thing to pay attention to. And then, beliefs, I think beliefs they're not like facts, right? This is how I think the afterlife is, or something that, hasn't been proven in science. And we've always lived under this. I mean, in America, there's been this ability to have these different beliefs and live together in one country. And that seems like it's going askew a little bit right now, or quite a bit. But it all comes from your experiences. Everything comes from lived experiences, whether it's, whether you gain your maturity through lived experiences only, or you're highly educated, it's still an experience. What you experienced in a classroom is different than somebody else experienced. What I experienced in my lifetime is different than what other people have experienced. Every single human has a completely different set of experiences.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think that, so I think you're right in where you're going with this. I like it.
And I think that's you have to do Penny, here I go. I think that's what I love so much about what the work we did from our past literature. And I just look at something that I need to do is really go back and read those chapters. And this is the consciousness under the rubble because one of the things that you pointed out, which I was hitting on and didn't realize it, it was like most of the subtle childhood trauma we've all experienced was caused by the lack of emotional self-awareness of our caregivers. And so we know that there is not just things we have to work on, but how we've been built. And we have to undo that. And we have to be intentional about it. So that's the work that I'm going to commit to continue to do at least for now and hopefully forever. But that's my focus this week is really to stay in that awareness of myself, but also how that impacts my communication, communication with others. Because if we're not intentional about that, we're just going to keep staying in a loop of negativity, more division, uh, more walls or barriers being built up. And that is not my core. And that was never my core as an educator, because I believe in an inclusive environment. So I have to practice that, and I have to make myself even push further, as you and I've talked about before. It is now or never to even do that more. So um,
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think as I went through this last, so for me, I guess I started this 13 years ago. And when I started it with the hypnotherapy that I was doing, and I was bumping into childhood trauma immediately, like the first meeting that I went to, or the first appointment I went to, and I was forced to think at that point. That's where I started the wheels really turning. And I was forced to really think about what had happened in that childhood event, what had happened in the real time working through the childhood event. And then as I would go on before my next appointment, I would recognize some of the things that would come up that were related to that childhood event. And it started I mean, for me, it was always about food and overeating, and I didn't understand about triggers, and people weren't talking about that at that time. But when I started to realize, oh, okay, wait, this trigger is connected to something. It's not something that's just magically appearing in my head. And triggers could be on anything. When people get upset, I mean, people will get angry and storm off from a conversation, for example. That's a trigger. So you've been triggered somehow. So anything for any behavioral pattern that you see or something that's off your normal character will be related to a piece of childhood pain or trauma that has been unresolved. So where I was going originally with this was the fact that emotional self-awareness is important if you're going to start this work, learning the tools of emotional self-awareness, the idea of identifying, processing, and releasing is very important, which we've discussed before. We've done videos on our journal and things like that. But using those tools within your day to day and really digging into the triggering pieces or the false beliefs that in your mind tell you you're not good enough, you can't do that, you're not, you're not successful, you don't deserve that. Anything that where you feel a limitation or you feel a trigger, it's trying to help you understand it more. And with the use of the tools, you can pay more attention and then do the work around it, if that makes sense.
it makes total sense. You have me thinking, and then I want to give you a chance if you want to bring another topic to the table, um, to do that, because that's what the lab is, us all sharing. One of the things that I want to share though is, or what you brought out, is the tools. There are so many tools. It's like which tool to start with, and so that's why I said this week one of my things was to be intentional on understanding myself and how I communicate. Now, when I communicate, what you just added, which will be good to do for this month because we do this once a month, and I'll bring this back. What do I do in the short term if someone hits my trigger? Because even though we're working on them, they still, some of those still sit there. So we have to acknowledge that they are still in this around me. And so what
Mhm.
I think I'll do is, one of the things I learned, and someone else, I saw different people who support this work talk about pause
Mhm.
or stepping away and coming back later. But one thing we don't want to do is avoid. And so, and we can talk about that more, about the
Yeah.
work you've done and the difference between pausing and avoiding. But I'm really going to practice and keep in my mind that pause. So when I see something, when something's posted, I do not have to answer it right then and there. And
Yeah, if you're
that I
lucky enough
think
to
will
do it
help me.
in that format, that's right.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that would be one of the key things to start with for me. It might not work for everybody, but I'm really gonna, and I've done it, but I'm going to be more intentional, because even over the last month, with so much going out and I'm trying to be the one to help us be better, I feel like I have to answer things right away to correct the opinions that are presented as facts.
Right.
But I don't really have to do that right then.
No. And you
So,
probably, and sometimes they won't understand it because they believe it's the truth,
yes,
their personal truth.
yes,
I
but
mean,
I'm
maybe
not
that,
avoiding.
no. I mean, maybe that's a good way to address it as, well, I understand that might be your personal truth as a belief, your belief as a truth for you or your life, because then you're acknowledging that that has some substance to them that's a little bit higher than just a belief, right? Um, I think that's great to do it when you're on the computer or on social media or something. It's difficult to manage triggers when you haven't had a lot of practice with them. It took me a long time to really get to the point where I'm not really triggered. And now the only time that I get triggered is when someone has presented themselves as one thing and I've believed that they're one thing, and then they've come out as something else. And that was that happened to me recently. And I was like, oh, I've confided in this person who's not really a friend. And in the conversation, because the conversation was so manipulative and just judgmental, and kind of baiting. I was so surprised that it had happened that I just kept trying to prove my point. I kept trying to say this is, but you're not hearing my point. And I wasn't triggered as anything from the past. It was a warning against this type of situation. Don't spend your time in this type of situation. So once I got away from it and I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is just my emotions guiding me to safety, right?
Mhm,
But it's a
mhm.
little harder in the moment when you're face to face with people to step back sometimes. And I do it almost all of the time. It's just when you're taken off guard. But when we have those past things, past beliefs, past, unprocessed pain, it's there and it's harder to see it, right? It's just like this person in front of me that I thought I saw clearly. You're not seeing yourself clearly because you haven't done that work. So it makes total sense.
Yes. And I think that we're getting close to the end of our time here. So I think I'm going to ask Penny, do you have anything else you want to bring up, or do we want to highlight some of the things that maybe people can think about for the time between now and our next session?
I was gonna do a little work around disconnect because I think that's important, but we can do that
Mhm.
next month.
I think we have a little bit of time to share. We can go over a little bit, if you don't, if it's something that I think is important, because it kind of ties into what we've been talking about.
Well, it gets a little touchy because I'm looking at the the idea of emotional competency in these different 5 different levels or 5 different layers, as you can progress through to be emotionally stable from emotionally self-aware. And what
And
I
can you
notice,
elaborate on those five, just for everybody else, if you don't mind, or
yeah,
you want me
well,
to
this
share?
is just me. This isn't a proven fact anymore. This is from my experience. I
In the
noticed I was
lab. We're in the lab, yes.
Well, I noticed I started being more emotionally self-aware. Then I felt a little emotionally intelligent, and I have read the book Emotional Intelligence, and I was like, okay, I get this. I'm understanding. Then as I was putting it into practice, I felt more emotionally mature, right?
Yes.
Wait, I'm missing one here. There's 5. Oh, well, and then the final one is as you put it into practice and release your trauma and everything, you become more emotionally stable and more solid
Mhm.
and everything. But the first piece and this actually comes into where the disconnect comes in, the first level where I lived for the first 53 years of my life was what I call default by childhood programming or childhood blueprinting. And I remember when I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, people were going to Europe to backpack to find themselves. And I think that really said a lot about a different time because I think people took time. Maybe they took a gap year. Maybe they did it before they started college. Maybe they did it before they started a career, or maybe they even took time just to figure out what they wanted to do. Um, but not everyone had that opportunity, and people kind of got shoved into doing different things, getting married, having a job. And if the introspective work isn't done, then you don't move out of that realm of just kind of default. If you don't get past that and you're just living as you were when you were a kid, these are my belief systems. This is what I learned as I grew up. This is what's right and wrong. I'm just going to take that and go with it. And be it whether you're going to work or whatever your goal is that has been kind of, I guess, kind of indoctrinated in a way into your thought process. then people kind of go with that. And then you don't step into these emotional self-awareness. And if you haven't had the emotional self-aware parents or the training, you're not paying attention to your emotions. So you're completely by default, so arguments are just arguments. You don't see them as growth. You know, mistakes aren't growth. Another thing is growth. It's just what it is. It's just you don't pay attention to it. So it's a disconnect. And it can be, depending on what happened during your childhood, and it can be a very detrimental disconnect because it can disconnect you from empathy. It can disconnect you from consciousness. It can disconnect you from being compassionate, and being kind. And it basically keeps you in your head with an external focus where you don't come internal, think about yourself and your actions, and you don't connect with your heart through compassion and intuition. So a lot of what I'm seeing now is these different levels and people stuck in that default mode. So I think that's kind of something I just did a post on this because I think it's important for people to realize that's why some people are so adamant that they're right. And that's why I don't necessarily like the idea of right or wrong, because that right isn't what I would consider the best way to do things for everyone. So I think it's important to understand that level of disconnect is a default mode for many people. And we need to all understand why that's there and how to manage it, which is something we can talk about next month.
I totally agree. I think that's important to have that conversation continue. And what I want to get back to is the right and better. I thank you again for the clarity because I use the word right. And this again is why we have the lab to test different things out to see how they work. And you made a good point about how we have to be aware again of using right or the word better. And because of the way it's built in our lived experience and things that we're unpacking. The other thing, Penn, that you did, which I think I want to make sure I share with everyone, that you can look online and find out about this work. You can use AI, ChatGPT, to learn a little bit more. I encourage you to look up self-awareness and also look up disconnect. But that this information is also in the book that, and we're not saying get the book. We're just letting you know that there's resources on our website. In the book, Consciousness is Under the Rubble. The first two chapters talk about these things. That was not intentional. It just happened to be where this conversation led us today. So that's very interesting that we set that up as the beginning of the lab process to really think about how we can move forward. And Pin, I want us just to think about and please share how we continue the conversation that you just mentioned about the disconnect, and if there's anything you want us to think about prior to coming to the next lab session, so we could bring in the right tools, the right mindset to continue this conversation. So if you want to jump in, or if you want to just leave it as what you've left it at, we can just do it that way also.
Well, I think what you just said um, indicates the need for an open mind, right?
Yes.
Um, and I was asking somebody about why people are so adamant with, thinking that they're right. And this person said, well, people want to be right. And I was like, we've talked about how weird my childhood was, and that was never something that went through my head. I have to be right, or I have to. So I was like, oh, that's interesting, but that's probably very true. So that's why I've started to really stay away from that, and be really open-minded to, there are many different perspectives because there are many different ways that people have been taught to live, and all through the world, right? If you travel at all, you know that our culture is, I mean, compared to other cultures, we're very different in many ways,
That's true. That's true.
right?
Mm.
So I think
You said right. I'm just joking
what did I say right about?
that I was right about that. But go
Oh,
ahead.
well, that is true. You were right about it.
Just
Now that's a good use of the word right, because you were correct.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist. Go ahead.
I
This
like
is
it.
what we
Well,
do in the
that's now
space.
we get back to being impeccable with your word. So, so anyway, I think that open-mindedness to, because that default mode keeps people in that this is the only right way to do things.
Correct.
You have to
Yes.
follow my path because you're going to go to hell and die if you don't follow my path, or you're going to never make it to whatever if you don't follow my path, and you have to be the person I tell you to be. And
Yes.
all of that, you know, that behavior towards just controlling and manipulating other people comes from a closed-minded perspective.
Mhm.
So we have to have an open mind to do any of this, I think.
Yes. Yes. I'm 100% with you.
All right.
So, as we wrap up, just think about self-awareness, taking a moment as being a conscious ambassador and part of an emotional awareness advocate. I think pausing is very important. So think about practicing that, how to be intentional with the words and understand the way we see the word is not the way some other people interpret it. And how can we put our space in being open-minded about it? And then as we meet in a month from now, think about becoming open-minded. And what does that mean? Penny, do you want to add anything to wrap to close us off for today?
No, no, great job. You're right about all of that.
We'll see you all next time so we can determine who's right and who's wrong. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.